Should you add carbs back in if you have super high LDL cholesterol? You are a quote unquote lean mass hyperresponder. Well, the answer to that is it depends. Certainly we do know, and there's a number of studies that show that the addition of carbohydrates back into the diet, say 100 grams or more, often will result in a dramatic reduction in LDL cholesterol in those patients in which, or those people in which their cholesterol has gone up extremely high and they're otherwise healthy and lean. That's one way to do it. Now the question is, do you want to do it? What's the reason for doing it? If it's just simply for the sake of bringing your cholesterol down, then by all means, yes. Now again, if the carbohydrates are causing other issues, inflammatory issues, disease-specific issues, then you have to be more cautious about that, I'd say. So anyway, it can help for sure. It's probably one of the most powerful things, as was demonstrated quite nicely by my friend Nick Norwitz in his quote-unquote Oreo experiment. So yeah, you can do that if you want to.
Hi folks, it's Dr. Rob Cywes. I am the Carb Addiction Doc. And today we're going to talk about when carnivore goes wrong. How does carnivore go wrong? And we are going to talk about the facts of this rather than people's, I've been carnivore for 2 years and it's got all the noise and the pushback that I've had on other videos that have discussed some of this. I'm now going to, in order, give you the facts of how carnivore is the best diet to be on and when it goes wrong, and then how to fix it. Because what you've got to remember is that human nutritional biology is dynamic. You do one thing, there's a pushback or a change in the body, and then that change can overcorrect and you want to push it back. Do this simple thing. Take your current age, subtract it from 100. That's how long you have to do carnivore for. If you've been carnivore for less than 5 years and you're gum flapping and telling me you're going to do this forever, okay, just be forewarned that if that is what you are committing to, rather than a carnivore-based diet, which I'll identify in a second, if that's what you're going to commit to, please make sure you get tested regularly so that you're not living in the oblivion of kumbaya, I'm perfectly healthy. You may feel good, but things may be brewing on the inside that you may want to be aware of. So see a physician. Our practice does that kind of thing. See a physician that'll order blood work, order evaluations, and track you over time. So the first once you've done the math and you know how long you're going to do this for, the second thing I want to clarify, and my good friend Sean Baker will say so in this very video.
Question on whether including an avocado as part of a carnivore diet is beneficial, or what my thoughts are on that. Well, to be in the strictest sense, including avocado on the diet would no longer be a carnivore diet. That would be something else. Doesn't necessarily mean it's unhealthy for a vast majority of people. There are certainly people that an avocado into the diet would be problematic for them for various reasons. Some people have difficulties tolerating any amounts of fiber. Some people have, problems with some of the compounds that might be found in avocado. Again, I think those people generally are in the minority. However, it does maybe change the physiology a little bit depending upon how much is in there. A small amount, probably less so than a greater amount. And you can fill in really any food for avocado, provided it's a whole, unprocessed food. When you start getting into, multi-ingredients, ultra-processed foods, and I don't think there's any real level of that that's beneficial to people. Now, some people still do that and don't have great negative effects. But again, in the strictest sense of a carnivore diet, it does include fruits or vegetables. It's not part of the deal. It's something else. Whether that's good or bad depends on the person. All right, thanks for the question.
Define pure carnivore. Pure carnivore is what Paul Saladino was till 2020. Don't put pepper on your steak. Don't. Evangelically anti-plant. Mostly even anti-dairy. But dairy is carnivore. So pure carnivore is when you eat nothing but animals and animal products. It's that simple. If you eat anything else, you're not carnivore. You are carnivore based. It's like a vegan who eats steak. I'm a vegan, but every now and then I go out to eat steak. Okay, you're not a vegan.
I'm a vegan that likes steak for the iron. And John's a vegan when he's interviewed on TV. When we go out for a nice meal, I'll order the steak for the iron. And he'll order butternut squash. And then he'll be looking at my steak and he's not listening to what I'm saying. And so what I do right at the end, I go, oh, I can't eat that last bit. Oh, what a waste, like that. And then we just swap the plates round and it's all in silence. And he eats this bit of steak and the look on his face after he's eaten it is like, you know those Facebook adverts that go viral of the deaf baby when it gets a hearing aid?
So the healthiest diet actually is a carnivore-based diet, but make sure if you're a carnivore that eats avocados or you're a carnivore that drinks coffee, yes, drinks coffee. Let me go get my bow and arrow and go and shoot a coffee animal that's running right by. No, coffee grows on trees, guys, or on bushes. Okay, so carnivore-based is the ideal diet because it does offer a tiny fraction of non-pure animal product. The second thing that we have to be very certain about, and this is what a lot of people in the carnivore space are not making a distinction about. There is a big distinction between plants and carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are simply three things. If you're Ben Bickman, it might be four. Glucose, galactose, fructose, and maybe allulose. I'm going to leave allulose out of the equation. Glucose, galactose, fructose, those are what carbohydrates are. Sugar. It may be in a chain like a starch or as glycogen, which glycogen is the equivalent of starch that is stored in humans or in animals. But you've either got glycogen, starch, or simple sugars. That's carbohydrates. Plants are anything else, any vegetables, any animal products, any processed things. I put that kind of in the plant category. And they include plant proteins. They include a variety of celluloses and things that humans can't metabolize. Plants themselves have elements in them that can cause inflammation. Absolutely. And if you've suffered inflammation from plants as a separate category, then it's very simple. Leave them out. Don't eat them. Sugar and starch, this is very important to understand. Sugar and starch does not cause harm. Sugar and starch does not cause harm. Our use of sugar and starch in a chronic, excessive way, where our body breaks down and our blood sugars start to elevate, or we trigger a massive rise of insulin, we become insulin resistant because of our excessive relationship with sugar as a drug, not a food, causes the harm. The harm is in the relationship and the way your body handles it. Sugar does no harm. And if you say, yeah, but if your liver does not produce sugar, you are dead. You are dead within a few seconds. Every mammal's liver produces sugar. It's called gluconeogenesis, the new production of glucose. And without it, you're dead. So don't tell me you don't need sugar. You either produce it or you consume it. But it's what sugar does in your body when you overconsume it that causes the harm. So we need clarity on facts. And if you want to, make sure your facts are clean. Make sure your facts are clean. Don't come with dirty noise. Okay, why does this then matter? So if I'm a carnivore, what is the benefit of carnivore? Carnivore has incredible early benefits. A pure carnivore diet is the single fastest, healthiest way to correct insulin resistance. No question about it. So the carnivore diet is ideal, does very well. It reduces obesity, you lose weight very effectively. It gets rid of type 2 diabetes. It restores insulin sensitivity. It reduces inflammation and autoimmune diseases in many people. It improves gut symptoms as part of an elimination diet. It eliminates ultra-processed foods that can cause a variety of problems. and it will reduce baseline insulin until you're insulin sensitive. It'll reduce triglycerides, reduce cardiovascular risk. It is a wonderfully healthy way to do it. Carnivore improves your health, but there is no inflection point where you've seen an improvement and carnivore stops and you're as good as you can be. The problem is that the improvement continues beyond an inflection point where you're as healthy as you can be on this diet, and then it continues. It continues further down, and now you start to get into hormonal disruption. And we can track and follow that. For some people, it happens in the case of 1 or 2 years. It may take 5 to 6 years. But we have markers where the carnivore diet pushes our health beyond optimal health. And that, folks, is what I call insulin suppression. We see lower levels of insulin, but several of the other markers go off. Now, I've known about this in practice. When I was in practice, I've known about it for a long, long period of time. However, what I didn't know, aside from work I did in the laboratory, is whether that caused harm or not. And the big change now, I've got anecdotes of harm. I've got patients that have had heart attacks on a regular basis, people's CAC scores going up. I see that in my carnivore population. However, we now have proof from the Feldman lean mass hyperresponder study that recently came out, 2 publications. The latter publication, you'll see it in the show notes, documented a rise in non-calcified soft plaque in carnivores who are insulin suppressed. So we now know categorically and factually that over time, a certain population does develop cardiovascular disease. Now, all they were looking at was cardiovascular disease. So that is in a subpopulation who are vulnerable to that. There are other populations who can't quite lose their weight. They see their weight going back up or stabilizing, now can't lose weight. Their muscle structure is falling apart. They're getting fatigued, they're feeling weak, they're feeling flat, electrolytes are off, testosterone's off. Those are some of the other effects, and that is driven by biology. So carnivore can be too good. Pure carnivore can be overcorrected. And the reason this matters is because of the risk it poses to you over time if you're vulnerable, particularly your heart. So let's do a little sidetrack and look at the 3 different types of people who are vulnerable, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to exclude the type 1 diabetics or anybody injecting insulin because they're not going to get insulin suppressed. And I'm also going to exclude people on GLP-1 medications, Ozempic, Mounjaro, because they're not going to get insulin suppressed. However, there are 3 major body types. And really, this is how the hormones in your body work. And it's beautiful how evolution teaches us this. So if we look at one category, and I put myself in this category, one category can produce very high levels of insulin, and they make weight very easily. Evolutionarily, what folks do we see there? Those are the Eskimos, the Inuits. And if you study Inuit biology, they gain weight very easily. You look at an Inuit, especially at the beginning of winter, fluffy fat everywhere. Fluffy fat everywhere because they've been bulking up, they've been loading fat through the summer to gain the weight that'll help them through the winter. Now, these are the first world Inuits. And when we study them, they produce high levels of insulin. Their blood sugars may rise slightly in the fall, but they're very good genetically at turning that sugar into fat. And there's protection through the long winter when all they have is a pure carnivore eating pattern. So they've got very high levels of insulin, which we call compensatory insulin resistance. Squirrels do it, bears do it, other hibernating animals do it. They tolerate insulin resistance with high levels of insulin during the fall where they are consuming carbohydrates and they are consuming animals. Yes, the Inuit consume carbohydrates during the summer and during the fall. And they bulk up intentionally on that. The excess weight is not just coming from pure animal products. Then through the winter, they're mostly eating some stored carbohydrates, but mostly animal products. So they are carnivore based, but they are not pure carnivore. However, their genetics allows them to gain weight very easily. They do not develop heart disease. And in the modern era, people like myself are very obesogenic. We gain weight very easily. We can produce high levels of insulin, which clears our blood sugar so we don't get heart disease. On the flip side, you've got a group of people that live typically around the equator. And where I come from in Africa, we see a lot of Africans, the Maasai, the Kenyans, the Ethiopians, the runners, very tall, very lean. And physique looks wonderful. They are carnivore based, the Maasai, for example, carnivore based. But why are they tall and lean, whereas the Eskimos are shorter and plumper? What's different about their biology? Their biology is this. They can form fat for a little bit, but they cannot adequately turn sugar into fat. Their insulin production capacity is relatively low. So what happens with those folks is they may gain a little bit of weight, but they don't gain extraordinary amounts of weight. But if they persistently eat a lot of sugar, their blood sugars rise, and that population is vulnerable for developing plaque due to the inflammation from sugar. Now, the population around the equator, there are really no seasons around the equator. Think that one through. Okay? No seasons on the equator. So those folks don't have the massive cycle of food availability that the Eskimos do. And their genetic biology tended to be more diabesogenic, where they can elevate their blood sugar to perform well. They can carb load and perform very well, but they don't turn sugar into fat easily. Their sugar is always up in their bloodstream. They release it and produce it very easily, and they are prone to cardiovascular disease. And we see a spate of diabesogenic, skinny, super fit runners having cardiovascular disease, plumbing disease from plaque, but also getting electrical disease, arrhythmias and needing pacemakers and having abnormal heartbeats that preclude them from running. Or they have heart blockage and often die while they're running. And we see this in the elite athletes. Different population that's based on the genetics around Africa, around the equator. And then the third population, which is actually evolutionarily the healthiest population, typically found in populations that were in the subtropics. So further north and further south in Africa, where we have the body type, the phenotype called lipedema, where the upper part of the body is relatively thin and normal, the lower part of the body is very obese. A different image to that seen in the Eskimos or, for example, in the Maasai. And the lipedema folks, for example, in the very southern parts of Africa, the Bantu tribes, the Xhosa, the Zulu, from where I come from, tend to have, especially the women, but the men too, leaner upper bodies, larger buttocks, larger lower parts of the body where they're able to store fat for some seasonal variation. And because they can store the fat in the lower half of their body, and the hormonal influence is there, they don't need massive amounts of insulin. So it's more sex hormone driven than insulin driven. And they tend to be the healthiest of the three genetic body types. Now we talk about ApoE4, and yes, the ApoE designation goes along with each of those three populations. So you see how evolutionary biology all fits together. And let's come back to carnivore. When we talk about carnivore people, the folks that are more the LMHR phenotype, where they can get super thin, they can get very skinny, they're athletic, but they're lean mass, hyper responders. They tend to be a subpopulation of them, often diabesogenic. Can an obesogenic person become an LMHR? Of course. Of course. Not going to happen to me. But yes, absolutely, you can become LMHR. but you're not going to have the heart disease. So in the Feldman study, the group that had the cardiovascular disease were primarily diabesogenic LMHRs. Now, on the flip side, the obesogenic LMHRs don't have the heart disease. So it's not one size fits all. It depends on what your genetic background are, and they're going to be more tolerant to a pure carnivore diet. See how that works, folks? So, and that's fact. That's easy fact. Well, how do I know it's fact? Because we can measure in the LMHR population, we can measure their insulin activity. And my job is to provide this information. I'm not here to upset people or piss people off that have found great relief from the carnivore diet. I did too. This is just saying, hey, your blood work, your body is dynamic in its metabolic way. Track it, watch it. Don't believe so much in what's going on. Because if you are that diabesogenic phenotype, you are proatherogenic. So I call the diabesogenic population proatherogenic, with rising blood sugar as their insulin falls, and an increase in soft plaque, increase in cardiovascular risk. Now, one of the key things also, one of the other facts that we have to look at, and this is important just as a baseline test, is that if you just get a CAC score as an LMHR, CAC scores are wonderful. For most people, they're a great screen. But if you just get a CAC score, and this is what the Feldman study showed us, CAC score only looks at hard calcified plaque. And the Feldman study talked about non-calcified soft plaque. And they used a study called a CT angiogram, CTA, to determine that soft plaque. CTA shows a soft and calcified plaque. So it may be worthwhile, if you're really worried, and you've been on carnivore for a long time, to at least get a one-time CTA. We'll do your blood work. We can check on that. Give us a call. We can help you to do this. But we can order the CTA for you at least one time. The problem with CTA is it's a higher dose of radiation. And one time is fine, but you don't want that on a repetitive basis. So in my experience over the last 25 years in the practice that I've had, I've seen these changes. And we've seen them in literally tens of thousands of patients. That's the observational status, the luxury that I have working in the space, is I see these patients. And we've seen insulin suppression, and now we know that it does matter. If you really want to test yourself, am I insulin suppressed? You can get an oral glucose tolerance test. Make sure they measure glucose, make sure they measure insulin, and make sure you get it done for 4 hours, not just 2 hours. Sometimes you may have to wear a CGM to track your blood sugars. And what we're looking for is a rise in blood sugar that stays up for a long period of time, and concomitantly your insulin level does not go at its peak above 30 international units of insulin. So you're almost behaving, or the Kraft table is a Kraft 5 pattern, almost looks like a type 1 diabetic, but it's due to a chronic low carb state. So those are ways that you can have a look at this. And when you look at our patient population, we see the heart attacks, we see the strokes. We recently had a near tragedy with one of our patients, long-term woman. She's with Kelly Hogan. The Kelly Hogan group know her very well, had a massive heart attack. Now, there was some missed clues there because she had a positive stress test that wasn't picked up. Fortunately, she survived and is doing well. But don't ignore that. Then forget about the heart attacks. Look at Paul Saladino's story. Serious carnivore, strict, so strict, won't put pepper on his steak through 2020. Then started feeling flat. Testosterone started going down, electrolytes were off. Because his testosterone was down, his muscle mass was down, he wasn't able to convert protein to muscle adequately. He was feeling horrible. And he corrected his insulin suppression, but is now, just like that pendulum has gone the other way, he's, in my opinion, overcorrected. Hasn't been measured yet, but he's up at 400, 500, 600 grams of carbohydrates. And he's convincing people that sugar is fine without fat. That is fallacy as well. And eventually, his body will break down and it'll show evidence of that. But these are folks who are in the public eye that have shown or have evidence of harm coming from a protracted carnivore diet, pure carnivore diet. Pure carnivore is a great tool, best tool out there, but it's not a long-term lifetime. And in the previous talk, I'm going to refer to that. We talked about why the human biology is different from a pure carnivore biology in that we need a small amount of sugar to trigger GLP-1 to release insulin. And if you're not eating any carbohydrate, at first you restore GLP-1 sensitivity and insulin sensitivity, but then you become GLP-1 suppressed. There's a downregulation of the upper GLP-1 hormone. And that's a concern. And now we hear all this backwards spinning from the carnivores. Oh my goodness, no, the hemoglobin A1C goes up because red cells live for a long time. First of all, that's absolute garbage. Secondly, even if I'm wrong, and even if it's true, but there's evidence to support the fact that it isn't, there's so much collateral evidence. There's so much collateral evidence that it's false. So if you say, okay, my A1C is up because I'm carnivore and it's a sign of health, then why are you getting soft plaque? Explain that one, baby. You got to look at all the facts. You can't just pick and choose them. You're entitled to your opinions, but there's only one set of facts. And then they talk about the rising iron. Well, I can tell you categorically, having over the course of my history done iron on everybody sequentially, and my patients will attest to this. Iron is occasionally a factor, but not in everybody, and it's unassociated with whether you get soft plaque or not. There's no correlation, certainly not in my patient population. So hemochromatosis, iron from eating all these animal products and all the... No. They're independent. They're independent. There is no association with that iron. So what people are saying, I've got to read through the facts so I can be absolutely clear, that high iron and high LDL increase your oxidative risk. That lean mass hyperresponders have lots of LDL particles, that high iron can oxidize LDL, form foam cells, and that causes atherosclerosis. Well, the Feldman paper also showed that LDL doesn't matter. So the argument of high levels of iron doesn't hold water because it's not in everybody. There's no correlation with cardiovascular risk. And also Feldman showed that LDL doesn't correlate with cardiovascular risk. So that whole theory of oxidation of the LDL is false. It cannot be true if you don't believe that LDL is a problem. And we know it is not. So what we really have to look at is, and buy into and change our mindset. I was also rah. But I look at the evidence and I'm willing to change my mindset saying, hey, we're seeing evidence of disease now. And let's carry on down that pathway. So one of the other pieces of evidence that we have of harm in low insulin states when blood sugar is high is, as a doctor, as a surgeon, we often use TPN, total parenteral nutrition, or intravenous sugar. So we put sugar into the vein. Well, sugar in the vein bypasses the gut. And any nurse, any doctor will tell you those patients have significant spikes in their blood sugar, and the spikes are elevated and uncontrolled, even if there's only 5% blood sugar going in, or 5% dextrose going in to your arm. And TPN, we often use 25% dextrose, highly concentrated dextrose. But the majority of those patients, even though they may be insulin sensitive, or at least not diabetic, require insulin, require exogenous insulin in the infusion, or they have to tolerate very high blood sugars, which obviously is not in your best interest for healing when you're sick, because insulin is not being triggered by GLP-1. So we know that if gluconeogenesis produces sugar, just like infusing sugar into your arm, we are not getting an insulin spike. We know that, and we have to give those people insulin. So there's strong evidence, collateral evidence, that whether it's TPN, whether it's intravenous dextrose, or whether it's gluconeogenesis, we do not see a significant bump in insulin, at least not enough in the diabesogenic, proatherogenic people to cover the rising blood sugar. Then there's another huge, big discussion point. And this is just logic, but it's fact. All mammals survive exclusively because of one product. There's one food, carnivore food, that mammals cannot exist without at the most crucial time of their development. Think this through, and that is milk. All mammals have a period of time where they are exclusively using milk as a food type at a time of the greatest growth velocity. And we need testosterone, we need thyroid hormone, we need insulin, we need human growth hormone triggered to grow rapidly, as any baby does. And milk contains glucose and galactose at a fairly high concentration. Why does human milk contain glucose and galactose? Because we need it to trigger GLP-1, to trigger the release of insulin, to do that. Now, if you're very smart, you're thinking of this while I'm talking. Well, okay, if that's true, let's look at the milk of carnivore animals. Smart question, huh? Because if my theory is correct, then carnivore animal milk must be different to human milk. And it is. It is. It is. It is. Higher protein, higher fat, much lower sugar in pure carnivore species like the wolf, like the lion. So while even human babies are in ketosis, we need insulin triggered by sugar, much higher concentration of glucose and galactose in human milk than there is in that of pure carnivore evolved species. So again, you compare the milk, it again reinforces the facts we're talking about. So one of the final pieces of evidence, probably in my career, the single best paper in the ketogenic space that has come out was done by a young woman by the name of Isabella Cooper at Oxford during a PhD. I've got I was a terrible interviewer, but I've got a great talk by Isabella. She was great, I was terrible, but she talks specifically about this. In the women that she studied who were long-term fat adapted, not all carnivores, but long-term fat adapted, in ketosis, anywhere from 4 to 20 years, they all of them consumed between 50 and 100 grams of carbohydrates every day. They stayed fat adapted. Their insulin glucagon dynamics were perfect. They stayed fat adapted, but they used carbohydrates to remain very healthy and to trigger insulin. So we have Isabella's Cooper study, and then the final study that we have is a recent one just published by a guy by the name of Prince, really published by Tim Noakes. And the study was published in January of 2025. And the title of the study is Carbohydrate Ingestion Eliminates Hypoglycemia and Improves Endurance in Exercise Performance in Triathletes Adapted to Very Low Carbohydrate Diets. And the Noakes paper recommends 10 to 15 grams of carbohydrates per hour of exercise. And both of these, even in people not consuming carbohydrates, on a pure carnivore diet, recommend low-dose carbohydrates to trigger insulin when you become insulin suppressed, when you are that way. Okay, so while carnivore may be the best diet to get better, because human nutritional biology is dynamic, carnivore goes wrong over time. The elevated CAC score, the elevated soft plaque, is easy to measure. What's less easy to measure? Your cancer risk. How many carnivores don't get prostate cancer, delayed cancers, breast cancers? Not because carnivore, and here's the paradox, carnivore actually improves your risk of cancer until you become insulin suppressed. Because insulin is used as a cancer screening tool by the human body. It blocks cellular division at a nuclear genetic DNA translation level. So what happens? How does carnivore go wrong? Carnivore goes wrong when insulin release by the pancreas is reduced due to GLP-1 downregulation in the upper intestine, because GLP-1 is triggered by sugar. And when there is inadequate insulin signaling, we get impaired glucose disposal, and that can be seen on a Kraft test. We also see then that the liver becomes the primary place where you mop up sugar, because the muscles with low insulin, which should be the primary source of insulin uptake, muscles and other cells are not able to take it up. Sugar comes back to the liver, so we see rising triglycerides, which is where the liver converts protein to sugar, ships the sugar out, it's not being used, it comes back, and it goes toward triglycerides. So we see a rise in triglycerides. We see a rise in A1C, we see a rise in blood sugar. We see decreased, and this is important for athletes, strength athletes as well as endurance athletes. We see a decrease in muscle glucose uptake, less glycogen in the muscles, which results in earlier fatigue, earlier bonking, and electrolyte imbalance. And because insulin's low, and insulin regulates aromatase activity, another enzyme. What is aromatase? Aromatase activity regulates the production of testosterone. So we actually see a decrease in testosterone. I don't know about human growth hormone, but the decrease in testosterone results in a decrease in muscle mass, even though you're carnivore. And what do you do when you're carnivore and your muscles going down? You eat more lean protein. And everyone's, oh, more lean protein. And what do? You're making more sugar. You're making the problem worse. You're making the problem worse. Just like the type 2 diabetic distance athletes who find now they're getting a little belly from the deposition of sugar into fat. So what do athletes do when they start to gain weight? They run more. And when they run more, they carb load more. It's this self-fulfilling cycle. So when your testosterone goes down, you decrease your muscle mass. And what do? You eat more protein, which makes it worse. And then the final part is that insulin and glucagon should regulate each other. Well, when insulin is down, and your cells aren't getting sugar, they're sending a demand letter to the pancreas and to the liver saying, dudes, I'm starving here, I need energy. Glucagon is pumping out glycogen from the liver as well as fat, so you may be in ketosis but have elevated blood sugar because glucagon is active and glucagon is unregulated and unrestricted by insulin because insulin dampens glucose down. Glucagon down. So you've got unregulated glucagon leading to overproduction of endogenous glucose, rising blood glucose, rising A1C, and in susceptible people, inflammation of their blood vessels, rising CAC score. We see high free fatty acids, we see high LDL, super high LDL. So when I see an LMHR with a super high LDL, I'm not worried about the LDL or the cholesterol, but I go back and I look at the insulin and the glucagon. And I want to see what those numbers are. And I look at the triglycerides to see are they insulin suppressed? Because that correlates with, it doesn't cause, but those high numbers potentially correlate with a pro-inflammatory lipid profile. The lipids don't cause the inflammation, but it's a pro-inflammatory lipid profile in susceptible individuals. And then finally, as an independent trigger of cardiovascular risk, we start to see elevated uric acid related to protein waste. Elevated uric acid. And then we see an excessive stress response. We see cortisol worsening insulin. So when carnivore goes wrong, it's measurable early before bad things have happened. Don't bury your head in the sand. Don't be a kumbaya carnivore evangelist. I love the carnivore diet. But we have to look after ourselves, folks. My son is raised carnivore. I'm carnivore based. Maybe not looks it, but I'm carnivore based. So this comes from inside. As a physician who historically has seen this, and in my own life, we need to take stock. I'm not saying carnivore is bad at all, but human nutritional biology is dynamic and we have to track it. The practice We can check blood work. We can order CTAs. We can order CACs. If you're worried, you may be having the best time of your life. You may be as healthy as you can possibly be. Granted. But track the numbers. Give us a shout. Let us track the numbers. Let's figure this out. And then let's figure out a way how to fix this. So, last little bit. Okay, I'm insulin suppressed. How do I fix this? What are the adjustments? What are the solutions? I want to stay carnivore. How do I transform this? And this is what I use personally as a carnivore-based physician. We want to be more insulinogenic, and we want to be more nutrient-rich than just pure lean muscle. Okay? So how do we do this? We slowly, because if you do a lot, your body's not going to do well with it. But we slowly, very carefully reintroduce pure carbohydrates, not vegetables, not plants. You can if you want to. But making sure we're eating eggs and milk. So milk instead of just heavy cream. Remember I said milk has sugar in it. Cow's milk, goat's milk has sugar in it. Don't go and drink milk from a lion. Milk, cheese, honey in insulin suppressed cases. And if you want to, some fruit, some berries. I've got athletes that use UCAN. It's artificial, but it's still starch. And if you are not a crackhead like I am, a carnivore addict, you can introduce a little bit of rice, a little bit of potatoes, and slowly get up. You can start at 10 grams, 20 grams. Eventually, the Isabella Cooper study looked at around 50 to 75, a few of them up to 100 grams of carbohydrates a day. And the distribution is very important. You want insulin during your eating window. You want it down during your fasting window, if you are doing intermittent fasting cycling, which I recommend. So you preferably want to eat your carbohydrates before and maybe during a workout, say a banana or something like that, or as part of your first meal if you're eating 2 meals a day, because you need to preserve hormonal cycling. And this is corroborated by Isabella Cooper's work. You want to stimulate insulin release, but you don't want a spike that switches other uses of energy off. You don't want to switch off fat mobilization. So you don't want a glycemic spike, but you want a rise in insulin to do what insulin does. Secondly, if you're overweight, and I could quite easily do this, I've chosen not to for a variety of reasons, but you could use a GLP-1 medication. This is where microdosing comes in. So this is everyone, microdose, you don't want to microdose. Well, you're diabetic, you don't microdose. But for my carnivore patients who still have a bit of a weight issue or maybe are weight neutral, I don't do it on the ultra low skinny ones, but we can microdose GLP-1 adequately to release insulin. Tiny, tiny microdoses. And it works if you choose to go that road. There's some experimentation being done with low dose LDN or low dose. LDN is low dose naloxone, traditionally used for addiction management. I haven't seen good results with that. I personally have not seen good results with that. But again, there are others that do. The problem with using medication is the effect, the durability of the effect is very short. So I'm not hugely recommending that long term, but short term it's good, which will restore insulin signaling and allow your Kraft pattern to shift from a 5 to a 1. And you can phase the reintroduction of some starches to restore the incretin effect, to restore the GLP-1 effect, and improve gut-liver glucose axis. However, the crucial thing is number one, if you're on a carnivore diet, love it, live it, be evangelical about it, but be humble enough to monitor your blood work, monitor your CAC and CTA and CT angiogram, but most importantly, have somebody who knows what the hell they're talking about interpret your blood work. There are just way too many people that have no knowledge of how to do this. And the people in our practice are able to do that. So I'm a spokesperson for that practice, and we can run your blood work, we can do the CTAs, and we can give you carnivore-based biofeedback on those numbers and help you to track this in an effective way, not some standard American algorithmic way. Because a personalized feedback loop is essential to everybody. Not every carnivore is the same, genetically or by lifestyle. I hope that this has calmed a lot of people down. I'm not anti-carnivore, I'm responsible carnivore. And you want to be responsible for your health. And the purpose of doing this is to be healthy. So please, folks, dumb down the yelling, the shouting, the rhetoric. Let's be factual about this. Let's understand what's going on biologically. And let's make amends biologically to keep you on track and keep you healthy and keep you happy for a very, very long time.